Okay, first of all I'd like to apologise for my appearance. I'm not feeling that great. But today I'm going to be talking about the documentary Professor Green, Suicide and Me. This is a cross-generic documentary that was aired on BBC Three for 60 minutes from 9 PM till 10 PM, so quite a mature subject. It's a biographical, really about Professor Green and his father, but it's also a sociological documentary because it does explore a community of men who are under 45 or around that age, who have suicidal thoughts, or anyone really who's also affected by suicide. I was actually quite alarmed to hear that the biggest killer in men under 45 was actually suicide, and that 80% of all suicides in the UK are actually that of males under 45. So Professor Green's situation is a very personal topic to himself. So not only was this documentary his own personal journey to finding out exactly why his father committed suicide, and to also bring closure, but also the documentary is made to put more attention to the problem that we are having in Britain today. It's quite a surprising factor, and it is simply because men feel that they can't talk because of the repertoire that they need to be manly and they need to get on with things. So ironically, Professor Green talking about all of this, he actually breaks down several times, showing his emotional side, and that's okay. Saying we're emotional human beings, and that's okay. He breaks down Barras by exposing himself as just a natural human being. There's no, even though he's a rapper, he looks like a really man's man, really hard, you know, but actually at the end of the day he's emotional just like anyone else, and it's okay to show that. That's the general message of this programme. So the point of view of which this documentary focuses on is of course Professor Green's. He also approaches like a sort of a journalistic role, because he's also going along with finding out things, such as going to experts to talk about, you know, what causes suicidal thoughts, you know, the train of thoughts, what actually happens mentally, and also different types of suicidal repression. I think the fact that Professor Green has done this documentary would actually speak to much more wider range of audience, mostly the younger generation. And I suppose it's almost like saying, let's not make that mistake again, that men feel that they can't speak about their feelings and therefore get treatment help and therefore, you know, not commit suicide. I also think the fact that it's quite a contemporary style almost, you know, someone who's a rapper, you know, who's actually doing something very serious with a very serious documentary. So it makes sense for BBC, whatever channel they would choose to put it on BBC Three, because it's the audience is mostly male on BBC Three. It's also predominantly the younger generation, so younger than 45 almost, and also it is slightly controversial almost, even though I hate saying that myself, you know, because it shouldn't be. But so yeah, the structure is generally in chronological order, but generally I believe this because Professor Green himself went on a journey, and I don't think it's a journey that can be faked, because the reactions, his emotion is pretty raw. So say for an example, he went back to his some of his dad's family that he'd never seen before, or spoken to about this subject, and obviously that's going to bring more raw emotion, and therefore it just seemed so much more exposing, and I suppose it would make people think, wow, this guy is almost pouring his heart out into this documentary and letting us in on all these things. So, you know, this guy's brave. I could be brave too, and perhaps go and help someone, or go and make that step yourself if you're having the suicidal thoughts, to go and seek help, because this is basically what it's all about. So there were stages throughout the documentary. First of all, it was discovering both more about his father and also other cases of suicide. So his father, it was first of all there was a discovery about his younger life, then his life when he was born, Professor Green, also known as Stephen. When Stephen was born, he also the life that he missed out on with his dad. So he went to other people that were closer to him to find out more. He then also gathered all this information, and further along he went to an expert in Glasgow University, who's actually one of the most leading psychologists, and to get really a prognosis, diagnosis, whatever you want to call it. Then linking in with his father's experience with suicide, feeling that he couldn't escape or at least talk, he went on to then go to other victims of suicidal thoughts and actual attempts. Then from that he went to look at sanctions and so where people would go to get treatment. And then finally he went on to cover the topic of what to do to prevent, say, someone from committing suicide, or what can you do as an individual that doesn't have those thoughts. So not only does this documentary target those who have depressing, similar thoughts and experiences with suicide and perhaps self-harm, it also provides an outlet for those who are also victims of such a dreadful circumstance. Again, the shots that were used weren't really sophisticated, however, because it is of a contemporary person, Professor Green, rapper, you think urban, there were some there was also urban music, followed by a bit of contemporary shooting styles. A lot of the documentary was actually set in urban areas. But what helped this documentary more, because it was so dark, it's quite a dark topic, there were poetic shots, poetic lighting, editing, just to give people time to think about what's been said, because there's a lot of information that's going on at you to some extent. I've actually written like 10 pages from that documentary. I would say though some of the interview styles, they were quite sophisticated in themselves. There were a lot of 180 degrees, which makes me 180 degrees angle, which makes me think whether it was filmed multi-camera or not, although usually these days you don't tend to film with multi-camera. So part of me thought some bits were maybe reconstructed to a certain extent, but I think I don't think any of the emotion and nothing was acted upon, if that makes sense. It was always the stories that were told that gave me the feel that maybe it was resaid in different ways of being shot at. So how would I relate this documentary to my own? Well, quite simply, my own documentary is going to be quite biographical in itself, whilst also positioning itself to speak to others who suffer from dyspraxia. Actually, it's quite a similar setup. You've got your main focal point, which is Professor Green, or in my case, Sean, and both individuals have almost a biographical element with them, but also then they both explore the sociological. However, the difference would be that Sean is not necessarily going on a journey throughout the process, whereas Professor Green did. It would be more of looking back on the journey that's been, because he's only 20, but he has been through quite a lot, and his story is really quite inspirational. But that's basically it. Both documentaries are set out to be inspirational to those who are affected by, in this case, suicide, or in my case, dyspraxia. I think I will also try and incorporate the modern and urban a little slight bit, because Sean being a young person, he's going to attract really the younger audience generally as it goes. So trying to fit his age, his personality with the documentary that's what I'm trying to do, because I think this documentary did it very well through how it was shot with the music. It was all very contemporary and within the parameters of actually the individual, who is quite a contemporary person himself.